The story begins with Haruto, a young boy no older than 10. His father had to move away from the city they lived in, and so the boy stood, saying goodbye to the girl he loved. Despite his young age, he did what many grown men fail to do, my friend. Looking into her tearful eyes, he said, "I have to go with my father now, but I promise you, I will come back and marry you. Even if I die or get killed, I will still return to you." The girl was deeply heartbroken. She didn't want to part with him, but life never goes the way we hope, and so the boy left, and the years passed. One day, Haruto was riding a bus when he noticed a little girl staring at him. Before he could even process what was happening, a horrific accident struck. Everyone on the bus died, except Haruto. He opened his eyes, his head pounding with pain. He looked around and realized his body had changed. The place was unfamiliar, and everything around him was foreign. Confusing memories flooded his mind. His head throbbed with unbearable pain, and he couldn't make sense of anything. He soon discovered the truth. After his death, he had been transported to another world. Now, he lived under a new name, Ryo. A group of workers entered the room he was in, carrying a bag that held something inside. They opened it and began eating. Ryo, starving, approached, but one of the men snapped at him. "Get away from me! Your stench is ruining the food." Crushed, Ryo walked out and ate a few pieces of fruit he found on the ground, but the memories still haunted his mind. Two bodies, two sets of memories, clashing inside one soul. A voice echoing endlessly in his head. Trying to pull himself together, he muttered, "Haruto is dead in his world. I am Ryo now. I must continue. I will never forget my goal. I will avenge my mother." He had watched his mother be murdered before his eyes when he was just a child. He would never forget that moment, and he had sworn to get revenge. While lost in thought, he was interrupted by a group of girls in clean clothes. They were looking for a missing girl and asked him if he had seen anyone. Ryo denied it, saying he didn't know anything, but the girls didn't believe him and hurled insults at him. Then, one girl, with white hair, stepped forward with gentle grace and said, "I'm sorry for what my sisters said. They're just upset because our sister is missing. I need some information from you." Ryo admired her manner and calmly told her everything he knew. The girl, named Celia, used her magic to try to locate her sister, but she couldn't find any trace of her. Instead, she discovered something unexpected. Ryo was the only one in the area with magical energy similar to theirs. She didn't know how he had that power, but she didn't question him further. As thanks for the information, she handed him a bag full of money and politely took her leave with the others. Ryo opened the bag and smiled when he saw the money inside. He quickly tied it around his neck and rushed back to the cabin to resume work, but the moment he opened the door, a man lunged at him and struck him hard in the chest, sending him to the ground. Thankfully, the blow hit the bag tied to his chest and spared his life. Frustrated that Ryo had survived, the attacker moved in to finish him. Ryo was terrified, frozen in fear, unable to move or think clearly. Suddenly, a strange girl appeared in front of him. She gently grabbed his face and said, "There's no time. You have to awaken your powers now, or we'll both die." In that instant, Ryo understood, and then it happened. He transformed into Haruto once again. The memories from his first life rushed in. His combat skills, sharp and deadly, came back instantly. He grabbed the criminal and shattered his skull in one clean strike. Catching his breath, he noticed the money bag moving beside him. He opened it, and to his shock, there she was, the missing girl. She was trembling, her voice full of fear. "Please, take me to the castle. My father will reward you if you bring me back." Before he could respond, she fainted from the horror of seeing the dead bodies around her. Ryo lifted her onto his shoulder and set out to find the girls to return her safely. They spotted him from a distance, but as he approached, one of them rushed forward and slapped him across the face. "You lied to us earlier. You said you didn't know anything, and now you're carrying her? You kidnapper! Let her go! Don't touch her again!" Ryo tried to explain, but the girl wouldn't listen. She was furious and fully convinced he was the culprit. Their leader raised her sword and pointed it at him. "You denied knowing her before, and now you bring her back? You're coming with us to the castle. You'll confess everything there. We'll decide afterward if you're innocent or guilty. If you are innocent, you'll be rewarded." Ryo asked, "And what if I refuse to go with you?" She answered coldly, "Don't misunderstand. This isn't a request, it's an order." And so, they took him to the castle. Meanwhile, the police arrived at his workplace and arrested the real criminal. They were about to interrogate him when a masked man appeared and said, "The mission failed." He activated a small device, and just like that, the criminal was dead. The masked man vanished, clearly planning something far more sinister. Back at the castle, Vanessa took the princess, Flora, to her bed to treat her injuries. Ryo, however, was thrown into prison for interrogation. A guard chained him up and said, "Listen carefully. Either confess that you kidnapped the princess, or I'll force you to talk." but Rio was completely innocent. "I didn't kidnap anyone," he replied firmly. The guard didn't believe him. He beat Rio mercilessly, demanding answers. Rio, bruised and bloodied, stayed silent. He would not admit to something he didn't do. At that moment, Flora regained consciousness. Vanessa was sitting beside her, waiting for her to wake up. As soon as she opened her eyes, Vanessa told her everything. Flora immediately cried out, "Why did you imprison him? He saved my life. Bring him here at once. We need to reward him." Vanessa rushed to the prison and was horrified by Rio's condition. She shouted at the guard, "I told you to treat him gently. Why did you do this to him?" The guard defended himself. "He's a spy. He kidnapped the princess. Give me a little more time and he'll confess." Vanessa snapped, "Release him now. He's the one who saved her." Stunned, the guard obeyed. Rio, however, was still angry and refused to speak to anyone, not even Celia. She used healing magic to tend to his wounds, which slowly began to close. Later, Rio woke up in bed, surprised his pain was gone. Celia stood by and said softly, "Don't worry, you're safe now. The king himself will honor you in 2 days." She added, "I'm truly sorry we hurt you yesterday. I promise it won't happen again." Rio smiled faintly and replied, "It's all right. But since I'll be meeting the king, I'll need your help. Teach me how to speak properly in front of him. I don't want to cause any trouble." After she agreed and extended her hand to help him up, a wave of immense joy washed over him, as if the entire world had suddenly lit up around him. Soon after, the king held a grand ceremony in which he honored Rio and officially announced his enrollment into the Noble Academy. The atmosphere was serene and magnificent. After the ceremony, Celia met him on the staircase, introduced him to his class, explained everything he needed to know, and informed him that she would be their instructor. Since Rio had joined late and exams were just around the corner, she told him, "If you ever need any help, come to me and I'll give you private lessons." Rio was overjoyed by her words and gladly agreed. When he entered the classroom, however, he wasn't welcomed warmly. All his classmates came from wealthy noble families, and they couldn't comprehend why the king would allow a peasant like Rio to attend their school. Rio paid no attention to their comments and quietly took his seat. Later, he went to Celia to study more, and things went smoothly from there. He continued studying with her until exam time finally arrived. While Rio was preparing, he was pushing himself very hard, which worried Celia. She tried to convince him to take it easy, reminding him he was still new and that grades weren't everything. But Rio reassured her with a calm voice, "I just want to learn, that's all." The exams began, and everyone took them seriously. A month later, the results were posted, and everyone gathered around to see how Rio had done. To everyone's surprise, Rio ranked first. One of the students erupted with anger, shouting, "That's impossible. He must have cheated or had someone help him." He was full of arrogance and baseless accusations. But Princess Christina stepped forward and said firmly, "If you have no solid proof of cheating, then it's shameful for a noble like you to act this way." Embarrassed, the boy backed off and left. After the results, Celia took Rio to her room to celebrate. She was genuinely thrilled by how quickly he learned and began to feel a deep connection with him, as if he resembled her. Rio, on the other hand, treated her as though she were younger than him, and their bond continued to grow stronger each day. 5 years passed. One day, the sword instructor noticed Rio's skill in swordsmanship and selected him, along with 2 other students, to represent the academy in the upcoming tournament. Many objected to the teacher's decision, but he stood firm and said, "Rio will compete, and that's final." Before the tournament, as Rio stood with Celia, she asked him, "What do you plan to do after graduation?" He paused, then said, "I'll leave this country. I want to visit my mother's homeland, the one she told me about when I was young." Celia was clearly saddened, but she didn't show it in front of him. Days passed, and the tournament finally began. 3 students were to challenge 3 knights to showcase what they had learned. The first match was Rio's. As the referee called his name, another student sneered at him, saying, "Try not to embarrass us. Just lose quickly and get off the stage." Rio ignored him and stepped into the arena. The referee called out the opponent. "Charles, step forward." Rio immediately recognized him. It was the same man who had questioned him when he first arrived at the castle. Charles was still angry. His rank had dropped after his previous encounter with Rio, and he had been punished. The referee signaled for the match to begin. Charles launched a barrage of powerful attacks, not giving Rio a moment to breathe. Attack after attack, Rio barely managed to defend himself, and the spectators thought he was done for. But then, Rio suddenly struck back, disarming Charles with ease. The referee was stunned and declared Rio the winner. Charles stood there trembling, yelling, "I was just holding back. Give me another chance, and I won't go easy." But the referee shouted, "Enough! You lost fair and square in front of everyone. Accept your defeat." Charles begrudgingly admitted his loss and left. Celia and the instructor were overjoyed for Rio, and the crowd was in awe, except for Charles. That That night, he sat drinking alone, muttering, "That boy. He reminds me of my darkest day. Every time I see him, I feel humiliated. I don't want to see his face again." The man beside him asked, "Have you known him for a long time?" Charles replied, "Do you remember 5 years ago when Princess Flora was kidnapped? He was the one who rescued her, and when I interrogated him, I hid him. The king punished me for it." The man's expression changed. Doubts about Rio grew in his mind. He began to suspect that Rio might be the same person who killed the criminal, and perhaps even someone planning to destroy the royal family. Meanwhile, Celia stood beneath a tree, waiting eagerly for Rio. Suddenly, another girl approached him and confessed her love. Rio didn't respond, and the girl walked away, but Celia had seen it all, and she was deeply affected. It seemed she had fallen for him. Later, as Celia reviewed the students' graduation forms, she noticed Rio hadn't submitted one. Her suspicions grew stronger. She realized he didn't plan to stay in the kingdom, and sorrow filled her heart. A new semester began, and Celia was now teaching magic. All the students used their magic normally, while Rio pretended he didn't know how, but in reality, his hidden magical energy surpassed them all. No one knew this, of course. After class, as everyone left, Rio approached Celia, but before he could speak, a student came up and mocked him in front of her. He sneered, "You worthless peasant! Stop clinging to the girls before I lose my temper. You think I don't know how you flirt every day?" Rio remained silent, but Celia snapped at the boy. "Enough! He hasn't done anything you've accused him of." The boy was enraged by her defense of Rio, but he had no choice but to leave. The next day, the students were assigned a field mission to explore the forest and reach its end. A senior student named Steele explained the terrain and everything they needed to know. Everything seemed perfectly in order. Then, another map appeared, one said to have come from the Stewart family, the same family that arrogant boy belonged to. According to his claim, the map contained a shortcut that would lead them to the end of the forest as quickly as possible. Naturally, everyone believed him and followed Steele, since he was supposed to be their leader. At first, they encountered a group of weak monsters, which they quickly eliminated in seconds. They continued onward until they reached a dead end. Everyone was confused. One of them asked, "Where's the path, Steele?" The boy seemed genuinely baffled, unsure of what was happening or why the path had disappeared. Suddenly, more dangerous monsters ambushed them from behind. The entire group was trapped. One of the monsters struck with a spear and injured the boy's leg, causing him to fall to the ground screaming. In the process, he collided with Princess Flora and accidentally pushed her toward the edge of the cliff. In that moment, Rio threw aside everything he was carrying and used his powers to pull the princess back up, but ended up falling in her place. Although he wasn't hurt by the fall, he didn't know how he would face the others upon returning, or how he would even explain what had happened. Meanwhile, the other students banded together to fight the monster and managed to defeat it. The boy's leg was treated shortly afterward. When they asked him what had happened, they said, "Didn't you push Princess Flora and nearly kill her?" He denied everything, claiming that Rio, the servant, was terrified of the monsters and had accidentally shoved him, which caused him to fall into Flora. Then he said, because Rio felt guilty, he threw himself over the edge to bear the punishment. How disgusting! Where did he even get the nerve to fabricate such lies? Yet sadly, everyone believed him, except for Flora. She knew the truth and wanted to find Rio no matter what. Meanwhile, someone was watching from the shadows, plotting a trap for Rio to test his true power and confirm whether he was the one who had killed that criminal in the past. While the students were walking along peacefully, Rio was hidden nearby, listening to the pig's lies and deciding not to return to the town again for fear of causing more trouble. Besides, he had never felt comfortable there. He had been thinking about leaving for a long time. Suddenly, a massive and unfamiliar monster appeared before the students. They tried to attack it using their powers, but it was useless. The monster was far too strong. It struck several students, laughed mockingly, and charged at them like they were prey. Everyone realized they couldn't win, so they scattered and fled as fast as they could. Only Flora remained. She had seen some of the injured students and ran to help them. The monster noticed her and started moving toward her, and she seemed doomed. Terrified, she screamed for help as the monster reached out to kill her. But how could such a thing happen while the legend Rio was around? He appeared suddenly and sliced off the monster's arm, shouting, "Run from here now!" He activated his spiritual energy and began battling the monster furiously. Flora watched in awe, mesmerized by the sheer power he possessed. Rio fought the beast with incredible skill. Then, gathering his energy into his sword, he struck a single clean blow that severed the monster's head. He had killed it all by himself. The other students finally arrived at Flora's location, but Rio spotted them just in time. He used his power and vanished before anyone could see him. However, the man lurking in the shadows had seen everything and now knew who Rio really was. It looked like he had dark plans in mind. At the end of the day, after all the students had returned to the castle, Celia was carrying some items to deliver to the king. Just before knocking on the door, she heard Rio's name being mentioned inside the chamber. She paused, focused on the conversation, and moved closer to listen. The pig boy's father was saying to the king, "My son caused today's incident, and I sincerely apologize, but I cannot allow him to be punished. We must place the blame on Rio." Upon hearing this, the king began to think carefully, then replied, "As long as the blame is cast on a boy of no noble origin, it doesn't matter. The important thing is not to weaken the royal family or lose the Stuart family." The king agreed and said, "Do whatever you see fit." He smiled wickedly, clearly knowing exactly what he intended to do. As for Celia, after hearing all of that, she rushed to the library, her heart filled with worry for Rio. Moments later, Rio entered, disguised to say goodbye before leaving. She ran to him and hugged him tightly, checking his body to make sure he was all right. Once she was assured of his safety, she sat him down, and he began telling her everything that had happened in detail. After learning the truth, she became furious, but didn't know what she could possibly do. Rio then told her that he could no longer stay in the city and had to escape as soon as possible. He said, "But because you're the dearest person to my heart, I came to say goodbye." Celia was deeply moved by his words. She replied, "Take care of yourself. I'll wait for your letters to know you're safe. Just don't keep me waiting too long." He said, "All right, but I'll send the letters under a different name, Haruto, so no one becomes suspicious. Goodbye, Celia." She ran to him once more and hugged him tightly. "I'll wait for you," she whispered. Then he left, and her eyes filled with tears she could barely hold back. She recalled all their memories together, overwhelmed by sorrow. Rio left the forest, heading toward his birthplace, Nagumo City. On his way, he passed through Arslan City and stopped to eat and relax for a bit. While browsing the wanted posters, he was relieved to see that his name wasn't on the list. He entered a restaurant, but felt someone watching him. He turned around. No one was there, so he continued on his way. Suddenly, someone behind him shouted, "Ramen!" He was shocked. "Ramen! Here." He couldn't believe it. He sat down, had a bowl, and asked the restaurant owner, "Where do you get your ingredients and spices?" The owner pointed to a nearby store, so Rio went there and bought everything he needed. After that, he sent a letter to Celia, letting her know he was all right and everything was going smoothly. Then he left the city and resumed his journey. But on the road, he spotted a girl lying on the ground. As he approached to help her, she surprised him with a poisoned needle. She stood up and said, "I'm going to kill you." Rio immediately dropped his belongings and began healing himself using his power. "I won't let you kill me." A fierce battle broke out between them. The girl was incredibly strong, wielding the energy of demi-beasts and skillfully using magic. Rio didn't know how to handle her at first and tried to analyze her style, then realized she was focused entirely on a specific dagger. So, he deliberately left an opening in his defense, tempting her to strike. When she lunged, Rio struck with overwhelming force, knocked her to the ground, and disarmed her. "You've lost," he told her. After the girl was captured, her eyes suddenly changed. She began to cry bitterly and called out for her mother to come save her. Rio didn't understand what was happening and used his powers to try and calm her down. Then, she fainted, memories flashing through her mind. Memories of what had led her to this moment. She was from the same world as Haruto. She had boarded the very same bus he had before his death. After she died, she too awoke in this world, but as a slave, forced to serve the arrogant son of Stuart. That vile boy tormented her every single day, beating her until she could no longer resist. Around her neck was a slave collar, one that sent jolts of electricity through her body whenever she disobeyed his orders. When Rio saw the collar, he realized someone must have ordered her to kill him, so he focused his mind and began searching for a spell that could remove it. After much effort, he succeeded, and the collar was finally broken. Latina awoke to find Rio standing before her, his hand extended toward her. Fear surged through her, and she scrambled to reach for the knives behind him, but Rio calmly said, "Don't try it. There's no point in what you're doing. I know you were forced to follow his orders and that you tried to kill me because of him. Don't worry. You're free now." He asked her to tell him what had happened, and once she realized she wouldn't be hurt again, her eyes welled up with tears. She broke down sobbing and began telling him everything. Stuart had ordered her to kill Rio the moment he left the city, ensuring she left no evidence behind. That's why his name was never listed among the wanted. At that moment, Rio understood it was all the work of that pig, and he told her, "All right, you're free now. I've broken your chains, and if you wish to return to your fellow beastkin, walk that path for 2 days, and you'll reach them. Stay with them. Don't ever go back to Stuart." He slung his bag over his shoulder and prepared to leave, but to his surprise, she followed him. He turned and asked, "What do you want?" She replied, "I want to go with you. I hate walking alone. Please don't leave me." Rio grew angry. "How do you expect me to forgive you? You tried to kill me. Do you honestly think I could forgive someone who tried to take my life? You're dreaming." The girl trembled in fear, but then reached into her pocket and pulled out the broken collar. She held it out to him and said, "Take me with you, even if it means being a slave again. Just please don't leave me here alone." Rio was moved by her words. "What's your name?" he asked. "Latina," she replied. "All right, Latina. From today onward, you'll travel with me. Let's go." Latina's joy was overwhelming. They continued on their journey, and partway through, they stopped to eat. It was the first time she had ever tasted proper food. She ate while crying from happiness, unable to believe it was real. Rio smiled and said, "Take your time. No one's going to steal your food. Why are you eating so fast?" Latina didn't hear him at first, too focused on eating. But when she realized what he'd said, she looked up and replied, "This is the first time someone has treated me kindly. I'm just so happy." Rio was pleased to hear that. "Then from now on, you'll eat the best meals every day, and no one will ever hit you again." Meanwhile, far away, Celia was reading a letter from Haruto. Her heart brimmed with joy. She missed him deeply and silently wished him all the best. That night, Rio and Latina set up camp. Rio took out a bowl of ramen and began preparing it as spaghetti. To his surprise, Latina recognized it instantly, calling it by its name from their former world. Rio was shocked. "How do you know its name?" he asked. "I used to eat it before," she said, though she didn't tell him where. Rio grew more suspicious that she'd gone through a similar experience to his, but he still wasn't sure. Later that night, as she slept, Latina was tormented by nightmares, visions of Japan, and the accident that had taken her life. That's when Rio knew for certain she was from the same world. He felt a deep sorrow for her, and found himself growing more attached. By morning, they resumed their journey. The bond between them grew stronger. Latina began to see Rio as an older brother, a protector who would shield her from all harm. She was truly happy by his side. Eventually, they arrived at a dense forest. There, Rio noticed a peculiar tree, one that Latina couldn't see. Sensing something strange, he moved closer and suggested they rest for the night and continue in the morning. Latina entered the tent to sleep, and Rio followed shortly after. But suddenly, a noise outside caught his attention. He stepped out and was startled to find a wolf staring him down. The wolf emitted a blinding light, and 4 beastkin surrounded him. Rio was completely confused. He tried to defend himself and understand what they wanted, but they kept attacking him relentlessly. One of the girls approached to interrogate him, while another entered the tent and found Latina inside. She instantly assumed Rio had kidnapped her. Furious, they began to beat Rio mercilessly until he lost consciousness. As darkness swallowed him, that mysterious girl reappeared in his dream. "How have you been, Haruto? It's been a while," she said. "Sorry, I can't help you in your current situation, but the least I can do is give you a pleasant dream." Then she vanished. Rio awoke to find himself chained to a bed. The girls who had attacked him entered the room, accompanied by the village priestess. But before the elder could speak, Latina burst into the room, rushing to his side and embracing him with relief. She was overjoyed to find him unharmed and apologized for not being able to help. She asked who had done this to him. Realizing their grave mistake, the girls apologized sincerely. They unchained him, and the elder instructed them to prepare a comfortable room for him. Now that they understood he was innocent, the old priestess said, "Tomorrow I will formally apologize. For now, rest." Rio agreed, still unsure of what was going on. The next morning, he spoke with the elder, asking her about the mysterious tree and why only he could see it. She explained, "It's because of the spirits. Those with the ability to use them can see that tree." "Do you use spirits, Rio?" He replied, "Something like that." They entered a sacred chamber within the village, where 2 elders awaited. Their demeanor was gentle, and they spoke to Rio with great respect. First, they apologized for the way he had been brought in. Then they said, "You have earned a reward for saving one of our kin." Rio responded, "I'd like you to take care of Latina. She's been attached to me ever since we met, but my journey is dangerous, and I may not be able to protect her." The old priestess stepped forward. "We We already intended to do that. Choose another gift, Rio. He replied, if you have someone who can teach me the art of spirits, I would be truly grateful. They all agreed. Consider it done. Then, a woman entered the room. Everyone stood in respect. Her name was Doris, the spirit of the tree, revered by all. She approached Rio, placed her hand on his head, and said, strange, inside you sleeps a human soul. Rio didn't understand. What do you mean? There's another soul inside me? Doris explained. Yes, you possess a power unlike any other. Within you lies a dormant soul, human in form. If it awakens, it will grant you tremendous support and vastly enhance your abilities. Rio struggled to grasp the full meaning of her words, but simply nodded and said, all right. Days passed in the village, and Rio had begun his intense training, seeking to enhance his spiritual energy. He learned new skills under the guidance of everyone in the forest. As for Latina, she now lived in a clean home alongside 3 demi-human girls. For the first time in a long while, she seemed genuinely happy. Meanwhile, a criminal was seen heading toward a cave, accompanied by a young boy. At the cave's entrance, the man said to the boy, stay here. I'm going to do something inside and we'll be right back. Moments after entering, he emerged holding a dragon egg in his hands. The boy, bewildered, asked why he had taken it. The man replied coldly, that's none of your concern. I'm going to run some experiments on it. Just carry it and keep it with you until we reach the city. The boy obeyed, though his anxiety was obvious. Nervously, he asked, won't the dragons come after us? Why did we take their egg? The man laughed wickedly. Relax, no one will find us. We're far enough away now. But as he glanced back, his smirk faded. A swarm of dragons was flying straight toward them, their eyes brimming with fury. At that very moment, Rio and Latina had just been officially recognized as members of the village. Doris herself had bestowed upon them the seal of belonging. A great celebration was held in their honor, filled with joy and cheer. Latina had fully blended in with the other girls and truly adored her new life. Seeing this, Rio decided it was time to tell her his intentions to leave. Elsewhere, the criminal and his companion had stopped at a site near the forest. The man said, we'll rest here tonight. Take this pill. I'll go scout the area. The boy took the pill, though he looked uneasy. The man then used his magic to soar into the sky, heading toward the dragon's nest. Finally, he muttered to himself, it's time to execute the plan. Meanwhile, Rio had taken Latina deep into the forest. He wanted to speak with her alone and share his decision. Latina walked beside him, smiling brightly. Let's go back and rejoin the celebration, she said. Why are we heading away from everyone? I need to talk to you about something important, Rio replied. But first, I have one question. Have you enjoyed your life in this village? Enjoyed it? She exclaimed. I absolutely love it. Everyone is kind to me. I have friends. Life here is peaceful and warm. That's wonderful, Rio said, smiling. But there's something I must tell you. I'll be leaving the village to continue my journey alone. I don't want you to get hurt if something bad happens. Latina froze, her expression quickly clouding with sorrow. No, she said softly. I won't let you go. I want to come with you. Rio tried to explain that his journey was dangerous and he might not be able to protect her, but she was heartbroken and walked away without another word. Back in the city, alarms rang out as the dragons approached. Guards were mobilized to face the threat. At the same time, the criminal used the absence of the dragons to slip into their nest and began stealing their eggs. It was clear he had something sinister in mind. Some demi-humans noticed the young boy and moved to interrogate him, but he panicked, unleashed the hawk that accompanied him, and fled. One of the girls tried to bring him down but missed. He was still celebrating his narrow escape when a massive dragon descended in front of him. His fate was sealed. Meanwhile, the criminal had gathered all the dragon eggs and completed his mission. He then shattered the pill he had given the boy, who dropped dead instantly. The egg he had been carrying fell to the ground and rolled to a stop before Latina. The dragon saw the broken egg and, consumed with rage, assumed Latina was the one who had destroyed it. He lunged at her with lethal intent. A demi-human girl rushed to protect her, but what could anyone do against a dragon? He struck them both down with a powerful blow. They lay on the ground, helpless. At the same moment, the village felt the tremors of the dragon's attack. The celebrations halted, and everyone rushed back to their homes. Rio encountered one of the village elders along the path and asked what was happening. The monsters are attacking, the old man said. The forest is surrounded. We must flee at once. Rio immediately remembered Latina was still out there, and without a second thought, he raced to save her. Elsewhere, the demi-human girl was hiding behind a tree, whispering to herself, "We need to lure the dragon away from the city to protect the people. But how? This is suicide." Latina, however, paid no mind to the danger. Determined, she decided to distract the dragon herself. And indeed, the beast followed her, tearing through trees, its fury unrelenting. Just when it seemed he would kill her, Rio arrived. He struck the dragon and snatched Latina from its path, saying gently, "Stay here." Then he turned to face the beast with nothing but his bare hands. What followed was a dazzling clash. Blows flew in every direction, The girl watching from afar was in awe of Ryo's overwhelming strength. She could hardly believe her eyes. Even the dragon was stunned. It opened its mouth to unleash a devastating breath, but Ryo was faster. He slammed it shut, then delivered a crushing blow that brought the dragon to the ground, lifeless. When the other dragons saw their leader fall, they panicked and fled the area. Latina ran to Ryo and hugged him tightly, tears of joy in her eyes. The other girls arrived, astonished by the power Ryo had displayed, and so, that long day came to an end. The next morning, Latina had begun to accept what had happened. She told Ryo that she had decided to stay in the village, but she would wait for him. She reminded him of everything he had done for her, then finally decided to reveal her truth. "I know this may sound crazy," she began, "but please believe me, it's the truth. I wasn't born in this world. I was born in another world, called Earth. I used to live in a place called Japan, but after a terrible accident, I found myself here." She continued, "You might be wondering why I feel so close to you. It's because you're so kind. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone very dear to me in my previous world." Of course, she was talking about Ryo himself, dear reader. "I believe you," Ryo replied gently. "Every word you've said, I believe it. Don't worry." He added, "By the way, I'm from Japan too. I figured everything out about you while you were asleep, but since you still seemed uncertain, I didn't want to say anything. It's true, we're the only two from Earth here, but don't worry, I will never abandon you. From now on, you're my little sister, Latina." Latina was overjoyed after hearing Haruto's words. Shortly afterward, Haruto began preparing for his departure. While bidding farewell to everyone, gifts poured in from all directions, to the point where he didn't even know where to put them. His surroundings were overflowing. An old man handed him a special bracelet, saying, "This will make everything easier for you." Indeed, the bracelet had the ability to store all his belongings, which delighted Haruto greatly. Once everything was ready, he set off toward the homeland of his father and mother. And here, my friend, begins a brand new chapter of this tale. So stay with me and enjoy what's to come. Haruto finally arrived at his destination and began noticing that everyone in the village had black hair, just like him. Yet, he didn't know whom to approach or how to begin, so he asked a girl there to guide him to the village chief. Her name was Ruri, and she led him to an elderly woman named Sai. As soon as he entered, she asked him, "What do you want, child? You don't look like you're from around here." Haruto shared his story with her and said that he had come to learn about his family's origins. He added, "My mother and father died when I was young, and I've come here to learn about their past." The old woman then asked for their names, and when he gave them, her face suddenly changed. She immediately ordered Ruri and the girl with her to leave the room. Once they had left, she looked at Haruto and said, "I want you to tell me your story in full, so I can tell you everything." Haruto began, "I used to live with my mother and father in a distant place deep within the forest, but I never met my father. He passed away before I was born. Then, my mother was killed when I was still a child. She once promised to take me to a place called Nagumo so I could learn about our roots and build them a proper grave as a tribute." The old woman was moved by his words and smiled, saying, "Don't worry, I knew them well. They were very close to me." Haruto was stunned and asked, "You knew them? How?" Sai replied, "Because your father was my son, and you are my grandson, Haruto. Don't worry. We built 2 graves for them the moment they left the village." She then took him there to see them. As she stood before the graves, sadness filled her face. She looked at Haruto and said, "Long ago, your parents committed a grave crime. Many people began hunting them, and they had to flee the village. To help them vanish, we built 2 false graves so that everyone would believe they had died and stop searching for them." Haruto didn't fully understand, so he asked her why, but she simply said, "I'm not the one who should tell you the rest of the story." She then returned to her home, leaving Haruto alone by the graves to pray for his parents. He sat in deep sorrow, lost in thought before the tombstones. That night, he returned to the house, changed clothes, and went to sleep. The next morning, he began preparing food, joking around with those around him. The air was calm and cheerful. Later, Haruto met a young man named Shin, and the two immediately liked each other. They decided to go hunting together. Haruto showed great skill, catching everything that came his way. As for Shin, he barely managed to catch anything. That evening, Haruto found his clothes dirty and created a bath using his powers. He entered to clean himself, and as he came out, Ruri and Alma saw him. They were stunned by how clean he looked and asked, "How did you come out this clean? What did you do in there?" He explained the idea of a bath to them. They could hardly believe it and ran inside with delight. The next day, Haruto was speaking with his grandmother Sai when they suddenly heard shouting from the direction of the bath. They rushed over and found a man named John arguing with Shin. John shouted, "Why are you standing near the bath? Are you trying to hit on my sister? Leave this village, you filthy bastard." John was crude and harassing the girls. Shin couldn't take it and went to strike him, but he was no match. John easily grabbed him by the arm and started choking him. Just in time, Sai intervened and said, "Enough, John. If you weren't the son of the neighboring village chief, I would have locked you away until you died." John replied mockingly, "What's What's all this about? My cart broke down, and I came to spend the night here. Is this how you treat a guest? Sai couldn't find the words to respond. John walked away, and as he passed by Haruto, he tried to trip him. But do you really think Haruto would fall, my friend? No, John was the one who stumbled and fell, looking completely humiliated. A while later, the tax officer arrived in the village and decided to spend the night as well. During Haruto's training, Ruri and Alma were watching, amazed by his strength and physique. They asked him, "Why do you train like this every day? What drives you?" Haruto was reminded of his past love, the girl he once promised, "Even if I die, I will protect you." He told them, "It's a long story, but I'll tell you. When I was young, I loved a girl very deeply. I made a vow to keep training so that I could protect her. She's grown up now, and I don't even know where she is, or whether she's still alive. But I've never stopped training, because I believe our promise still lives. No matter how far apart we are, we'll meet again." The girls were deeply moved, filled with admiration and emotion. Later that night, Alma became scared of John and went to sleep in Ruri's room. When Haruto found out, he gave them a magical stone and said, "Place this in your room. If anything happens, I'll be able to protect you." They took the stone and did as he asked. That night, John and his gang were plotting to break into their room. They waited until everyone was asleep. John crept toward the room. Ruri opened her eyes and found him standing there, pressing his hand over her mouth. "Don't make a sound," he whispered. Then Alma woke up too, and John threatened, "If I hear a word out of you, I'll smash her face in, and you're next." But did he really think he could get away with this while Haruto was around? The legend himself stormed in and wiped out all of John's men. The moment he saw them, a vision of his mother's death flashed before his eyes. He shouted, "What are you doing?" John tried to fight back, but Haruto circled behind him, grabbed his throat in pure fury and growled, "I said, what are you doing?" John was helpless. Haruto unleashed a barrage of blows. Fist after fist smashed against his skull, unrelenting, terrifying. Even the girls were stunned by his raw power. Just as John was about to be beaten to death, the tax officer intervened and grabbed Haruto's arm. "If you hit him again, he'll die right here," he said. "I saw everything. He'll be punished for his crimes. You, Haruto, go and rest." Haruto obeyed and walked away. He stood beside a tree, boiling with rage. He whispered to himself, "Once again, I forgot my purpose. I cannot let that bastard who killed my mother continue to live. I must get revenge, no matter what." Afterward, Ryo returned home, and everyone was expressing their heartfelt gratitude for saving the two girls the night before. Even the tax chief himself thanked him, and was genuinely astonished by Ryo's actions. The following morning, the tax chief was preparing for departure. He took the goods with him, and also had John and his companions arrested, intending to take them to his father for trial. While speaking with the elderly woman, she handed him a letter and said, "Please deliver this to your father when you arrive." The young man replied, "All right," and began preparing for the journey. Everyone set out alongside the tax chief to deliver their goods and sell them at the market. Upon arrival, John and his group were taken away for trial, while the tax chief handed the letter to his father. By the way, his father's name was Hayate. Hayate read the letter, and a look of deep astonishment took over his face. He immediately ordered his son to go and bring Ryo at once. Indeed, Ryo was found and brought to the palace. As he entered and sat down with them, Hayate looked at him in disbelief and said, "I can't believe my eyes. You look exactly like her, Ryo." Ryo, puzzled, asked, "Like who? What are you talking about?" Hayate began recounting the story from the very beginning, saying, "Your mother belonged to the royal family. I was her servant, and the one responsible for her protection. One day, while I was training the soldiers, a strange young man appeared. He was fierce and powerful, defeating all enemies on the battlefield, and he was the reason for our many victories. I challenged him to a duel to measure his strength, but he defeated me effortlessly. From that moment, I decided to appoint him as the guardian of the princess, your mother, Ryo." Over time, their bond grew closer and deeper, and the princess eventually fell in love with him. But during one of the royal meetings, the emperor's son saw her and was captivated by her beauty. That night, he sent his servant to kidnap her, but your father confronted him and delivered a fatal blow. When the emperor's son discovered what had happened, he was enraged. He demanded to marry the princess as a political arrangement, threatening to plunge the nation into war if the demand wasn't met. With no other option, the king decided to help your parents flee the village. To escape the wrath of those vicious hounds, they left, filled with sorrow. As Rio listened to the tale, his eyes burned with grief and rage. Hayate continued, "And now, I want you to meet the king and queen. I've already told them about your presence here, and their greatest wish right now is to see you. Will you come with me to meet them, Rio?" Without hesitation, Rio agreed and went with him. He found them seated inside the palace, overwhelmed with emotion at the sight of their grandson. They could barely believe their eyes. Joy filled their hearts, and Rio greeted them warmly as they began to converse. The grandfather then asked Rio to share his entire story from the very beginning, so they could understand everything he had gone through. Rio began telling his sorrowful tale. "When I was little, I lived with my mother in happiness. Though we were poor, every day felt bright and full of life. Then one day, my father's old friend, Lucius, entered our home. He kicked me with his foot and drank from a bottle of medicine. My mother rushed in, asking what he was doing. She tried to stop him, but he attacked her and killed her right before my eyes. I stood there frozen, unable to move. I didn't even understand why he did it, but I swear, when I see him again, I will show him no mercy. I will avenge her, no matter what it takes." The king and queen were heartbroken by what their grandson had endured. They asked him, "Do you still intend to walk this path of vengeance? Have you considered letting go?" Rio replied with resolve, "I know the path of vengeance is dark, full of pain and obstacles, but it's the only path I see before me. I won't rest until the dog who murdered my mother lies dead." The grandfather admired his determination and said, "Impressive. But to truly gauge your strength, I want you to duel Hayate in a one-on-one battle. No one has ever defeated him, except for your father. Now I want to see if you truly have what it takes to claim vengeance." Rio responded, "I accept." They made their way to the training arena. Hayate rolled up his sleeves and charged at Rio with ferocity, thinking he was just a weak boy, but he had no idea that Rio would make him look like a mere child. Everyone watching the match was in disbelief. How could the legendary Hayate be unable to match Rio? Hayate stepped back, preparing to use his ultimate technique to end the duel. He thought it would be enough, but Rio unleashed his strongest move, the water spirit technique, and struck him down with overwhelming force. The king and queen were stunned. They said, "Well done, Rio. We are no longer worried. When your journey is complete, return to us. We will always be waiting for you with open arms." Rio replied, "All right, I'll come back." After that, Rio returned to the village. Everyone had already entered earlier, but Rory saw him standing by the graves of his parents. He was reaffirming his vow, whispering, "Now I know the full truth. I will take your revenge. Don't worry." He added, "Goodbye." Then he went home and told Rory everything that had happened. She was overjoyed to learn that Rio was her cousin, and her happiness knew no bounds. Later, Rio told his grandmother that he didn't plan to stay forever. He would remain until the next harvest, then continue his journey to explore the world. The elderly woman didn't object. She said, "All right, do as you see fit." Days passed, and Rio gradually became an essential part of the village. He helped everyone in many ways, and they all grew to love him. Life there was peaceful and warm. One day, while he was teaching Alma a few things, she realized that he would be leaving in 2 months. She was devastated, unable to hold back her tears. She whispered, "All right, I understand." She returned home in tears, not knowing what to do. Her brother saw her and asked, "What's wrong? Why are you crying? Who upset you?" She replied, "No one upset me. I just found out that Rio will leave the village in 2 months. He didn't do anything wrong. The problem is with me." Shin understood right away. His sister had completely fallen in love with Rio, so he went to the elderly woman's house and knocked on the door. Rio came out to greet him and asked why he had come at that hour. Suddenly, Shin knelt to the ground, bowed his head and pleaded, "Please, stay in our village. I know I'm being selfish, but I beg you, don't leave." His sister saw him kneeling for her sake, and her heart ached. She rushed to them and apologized for what had happened. Shin looked at her, unsure of what to do, his eyes heavy with sorrow. After that, Rio gradually began to understand the situation and realized what was happening around him. Days passed and months followed until the long-awaited day of the harvest finally arrived. Rio was preparing to leave, and everyone was celebrating the occasion, enjoying the food he had prepared for them as joy filled the air. But while Rio was standing amidst the celebration, Alma approached him and asked him to come with her. Rio agreed and followed her to see what it was about. Alma stood before him, overwhelmed by shyness, speaking in a low and cautious voice. She confessed her feelings to him and said, "Please, take me with you on your journeys. I love you, and I cannot live without you." But Rio, after listening to her, gently apologized and said, "I'm sorry, but I cannot return your feelings." Alma tried to persuade him in any way she could, but Rio's heart had already been stolen by another girl the moment he arrived in the village. Shin had been watching the situation from afar and saw his sister's heart break before his eyes, powerless to stop it. The next morning, Rio began preparing his belongings and got ready to depart. He bid farewell to everyone, everyone, and all were saddened by his departure. But Alma didn't come to say goodbye, which made him even sadder, for he felt he had broken her heart. As he left the village, he found her standing there, waiting for him. She said with a smile tinged with sorrow, "I know you don't love me now, but believe me, I won't give up. I'll keep trying until the very end. I'll never grow tired. You just have to do your best to keep up with my pace, Rio. See you." Rio smiled at that moment, feeling happy that she had returned to her strong self, and replied with a smile, "See you." Then he continued on his journey until he reached the city of demi-humans, where he met Latina. The girl was overjoyed to see him return, completely immersed in happiness. Rio greeted everyone and told them he had been passing through and decided to visit. He also mentioned he was planning to build a small house to stay in during his visits, and everyone welcomed the idea and offered to help. Rio returned home and took a short nap. And suddenly, he woke up to find a girl sleeping beside him. He screamed, and the girls rushed in as soon as they heard his voice, witnessing the scene with their own eyes. Rio, in panic, said, "I don't know anything. Don't misunderstand." The girls couldn't comprehend what was going on, and everyone stood stunned, unable to make sense of it. At that moment, the girl introduced herself. Yes, she was the spirit Rio had once made a contract with, the one who saved him when he was a child. But now, she was suffering from memory loss, unable to recall anything about herself. Rio gave her a name and said, "Come with me. We'll go to Doris to discover who you truly are." He named her Licia. They reached the village elders and everyone got to know her, and things went smoothly. Then Doris arrived and began analyzing her energy and speaking with her. She asked her many questions, but Licia didn't know the answers and didn't respond to any of them. Doris asked her about the elements she could use. Licia answered with confidence, "All of them." Doris was stunned and said, "All of them? Are you joking?" But Licia reaffirmed, "Yes, I use them all." Doris couldn't believe what she was hearing and asked Rio to test her. They went outside and the battle began. At first, Rio tried close combat and Licia matched him skillfully, moving cautiously, as if afraid to hurt him. Then she tried using all the elements. She wasn't joking. She really could use every element, with immense spiritual power, even vanishing suddenly from sight. It was truly astonishing. Doris intervened at the last moment and stopped the fight before they destroyed the forest. Then she began explaining more about spirits and their nature. After that, everyone stayed there for a while, learning more about each other's abilities. Days passed and months followed until Rio ended his stay there and decided to continue his journey. The villagers gave him a set of gifts, including a hairpin that allowed him to change his hair color to any color he wanted, and a magical compass that would instantly return him to the forest. He said goodbye to Latina and everyone else, then resumed his journey. His plan was to pass by the kingdom where he had studied as a child, to greet Celia, especially since he hadn't sent her a single letter in 2 full years. At that time, Celia stood in the garden, holding Rio's last letter, deeply saddened, hurt by the silence he had left her in. Charles, the meddlesome young man, saw her and began to approach with his usual words. It was clear she had been engaged to him, but he was approaching her in an annoying way she could barely tolerate. Meanwhile, Rio had arrived in the city, disguised along with Licia, so no one would recognize them. They quietly sneaked toward Celia's room inside the palace and successfully reached it. They opened her desk, but it was completely empty. There was nothing inside. Rio was shocked and asked Licia to use her magic on one of the nearby servants to interrogate him. He asked, "Where is Celia? Why isn't she here?" The man told him that Celia was now at the Duke's mansion. Rio was stunned and asked why. The man replied, "It's normal. Her wedding will be held soon. She's going to marry Charles Arbor." Rio froze in place, unable to believe what he was hearing. He immediately asked, "Is this marriage her choice?" The man replied, "No, it's purely a political marriage. 3 years ago, a war broke out in the kingdom, and the king and his daughter Flora fled. After that, the Arbor family seized power, and to strengthen political ties, Celia was chosen to be Charles's bride." Rio couldn't contain himself, and decided to go see Celia himself and find out the truth. He asked Licia to locate her, and learned she was at the Duke's mansion, heavily guarded from all directions. Do you think Rio would back down? Of course not, my friend. He snuck through the darkness without anyone noticing, and finally reached Celia, who was in deep sorrow, contemplating burning Rio's letters. And in that moment, the hero appeared. He opened the door, and his hair returned to its natural color. Celia recognized him instantly, couldn't believe her eyes, and threw herself into his arms, overwhelmed with joy. They spoke for a bit, then she hurried to prepare some tea. Rio asked her, "I heard you're getting married tomorrow. I don't want to bother you or belittle the man you're about to marry, but Charles doesn't deserve you, does he? You know that, don't you, Celia?" She replied, barely holding back her tears, "Yes, I'm marrying him tomorrow. I know your memories of him aren't pleasant, but I've grown up now and reached the age of marriage, and I must marry." Rio asked, "Are you sure about this? Do you truly want to live with that man?" She hesitated, then burst into tears. "And if I refused, would you take me? Would you marry me? Would you take me away from this place and run?" "Of course not. Forget what I said and get out of here before you're caught." Rio didn't understand why she was acting this way, and he tried to get the truth out of her, but she refused to answer and told him, "Leave." Rio left indeed, unable to understand what was going on. As for Celia, she felt overwhelming happiness to have seen him again, and said to herself, "This is for the best. I'm just a puppet following orders. Rio shouldn't have to carry my burdens." At that moment, Rio stood beside Aisha, sorrow clouding his face. He was clearly displeased with the situation and with Celia's behavior, and he was doing everything he could to uncover the full truth. And indeed, the next morning, Celia was preparing for her wedding ceremony. The sadness etched deeply into her expression. Meanwhile, Charles was standing with a known criminal, and it became clear that the two had formed a secret alliance aiming to overthrow the royal family and seize the throne. The criminal sensed a spiritual presence nearby, but he couldn't pinpoint its source. As for Celia, once her preparations were complete, she stepped out of her room, only to be introduced by Charles to his 6 other wives. Yes, my friend, that scumbag was already married to 6 women, and now he wanted Celia to be the 7th. He left them to get to know one another, strutting away in his arrogance. In those tense moments, the wives turned to Celia and spoke with pure disdain. "You may be the king's daughter now, but once you marry Charles, you'll be the lowest among us. You better learn your place now, or we won't be so kind next time." Celia couldn't respond. Her heart was drowning in sorrow. Aisha had been watching from afar, and after hearing everything, she rushed to tell Rio what had happened. Soon after, Celia boarded the wedding carriage and sat beside Charles as the wedding procession began to move. Rio stood at a distance, watching everything unfold. He saw the pain in Celia's eyes and was overcome with anger and heartbreak. Can you imagine, my friend, Celia being stuck in this misery forever? But just as she stepped down from the carriage and reached out to take Charles's hand, the beast awakened. Rio appeared. He charged through the soldiers like a raging storm, seeing no one in front of him. Even those on horseback couldn't stop him. He tore through them one by one. He landed a crushing punch on Charles, then grabbed a dagger and held it to Celia's neck, shouting, "Don't move! Anyone who gets closer, she dies!" Celia was stunned. She didn't understand what was happening or why Rio would put himself in such danger. But then Rio spoke to her through telepathy. "Calm down. I'm not here to hurt anyone, and I'm not here to take you by force. I just want to know your true desire. If you wish to cancel this wedding without anyone blaming your family, just say the word and I'll make it happen. But if you truly wish to marry Charles, I'll walk away without causing any harm. I just need to know, what do you want, Celia?" She was overwhelmed, unable to think straight, but she summoned all her courage and replied, "Take me with you. I don't want to marry that dog." Rio smiled and said, "As you wish, my lady." He lifted her in his arms, looked at Charles with scorn, and declared, "Listen, Mutt, I'm taking your bride right in front of you on your wedding day, and there's nothing you can do about it." Then he bolted with her in his arms. Celia was overwhelmed with joy, barely able to believe what was happening. Her family cried out, terrified for her safety, but when her father looked into her eyes, he knew something far greater was at play. At that same time, the criminal realized that Rio was using spirit magic. He began to suspect that Rio was the same young man he had seen before. He observed him closely, piecing together the signs until he was certain. He launched a powerful attack to test Rio's abilities. Rio blocked the strike, then took off, carrying Celia, while the soldiers chased after him, trying to trap him. He slipped into a narrow alleyway and handed Celia to Aisha, saying, "Take her and run. I'll catch up with you soon." Aisha didn't hesitate. She grabbed Celia and escaped, while Rio stepped back out to distract the soldiers. They all charged at him recklessly, surrounding him from all sides. But Rio didn't flinch. He unleashed his fury, sending the soldiers flying, one after another. Just when he was about to escape, Alfredo arrived. Yes, Alfredo, the strongest soldier in the entire kingdom. He attacked Rio with all his might, and Rio barely managed to defend himself. He struck again, and Rio blocked once more. Then Rio shoved him backward. The watching soldiers were in utter shock. How could this mysterious intruder be so powerful? Alfredo noticed something strange. Rio wasn't even using his full strength. Growing desperate, he gathered every ounce of power into his blade and shouted, "This is your end." He unleashed a devastating strike, setting the battlefield ablaze and destroying everything in its path. When the soldiers tried to look for Rio, he was gone. They assumed he had perished. But do you really think he died, my friend? Of course not. He escaped in the final moment and finally reached Celia. She was standing beside sighed Aisha, and the moment she saw him, she ran to him, unable to believe her eyes. She tripped, falling right into his arms by accident. Then she quickly straightened up and apologized, thanking him for risking his life to save her. Rio simply smiled and said, "It's nothing. This is the least I could do for you." Everything seemed calm and beautiful, but suddenly, a strange light shone across the sky. Aisha grew tense and said quickly, "Rio, there's danger on the other side. They're in trouble. You must go." On that other side, 3 girls were descending from the sky. One of them was Haruto's first love. They were captured by bandits who planned to execute them. Can you imagine if one of them were to die today? No way, my friend. Rio arrived just in time. He heard the girls speaking in Japanese and instantly realized they were from his world. He annihilated the bandits and ran to unlock the door where the girls were trapped. He asked if anyone else was inside, and they pointed to another carriage. He rushed over and unlocked it, and then, boom. He froze in shock. Yes, Rio recognized her, his beloved. He couldn't believe his eyes. What on earth had brought her here? What a shock. After saving them, Rio continued walking with the group, speaking to Aisha. "I've completed the task. I protected the ones you asked me to." She agreed to meet him again soon and replied, "Next time, I'll come with Celia too." At that moment, Miharu turned to Rio and said sincerely, "Thank you for saving us." He answered calmly, "I only did what I had to do. There's no need to thank me." From that point, Miharu began introducing herself to him. Rio's heart was filled with anxiety. He feared that revealing his real name might trigger her memories of their childhood, but finally, he made his decision and said, "My name is Rio, but due to circumstances, I currently have no family name." As soon as the young girl heard the name, surprise spread across her face. She remembered the boy her sister once loved, the one who had bid her farewell long ago. Still, she hadn't realized that the Rio standing before her was that very same boy. Miharu then introduced the girl accompanying her. Her name was Chun. Rio instantly understood she was Miharu's younger sister, the same girl who was 3 years younger and whom he hadn't seen since leaving their neighborhood. Then, Miharu's younger brother appeared and introduced himself. Rio was puzzled to discover that the boy didn't share the same family name, and silently concluded that Miharu's mother had married another man after her father. At that point, Miharu asked Rio why people in this world spoke a different language from the one in Japan. Rio explained that it was a complex matter and promised to tell her more later. As they continued walking together, Rio suddenly stopped at a certain place. He concentrated his power, and suddenly, a massive stone house appeared before their eyes, seemingly carved out of a giant boulder. Everyone stood in awe, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then Rio turned to them and said, "I know it looks like a rock from the outside, but believe me, the inside is fully livable." As they stood before the stone house created by Rio, Aisha appeared, this time with Celia. As soon as Celia saw Rio, she rushed to him in a panic, asking if he was okay. When she realized he was safe, her heart filled with joy at the fact that he'd saved everyone. Rio then introduced her to Miharu and her group, but Celia was surprised when she realized they were speaking the same language Rio used to speak when they first met. She couldn't understand a single word. At that moment, Aisha stepped forward and kissed each of their foreheads, granting them a portion of her magic to enable communication. She then clarified that this magic was only temporary and would fade in time. After that, Rio invited them inside. Though the house looked like a solid rock from the outside, the interior was spacious and fully equipped for living. He allowed them to use the bathroom to shower and recover. Meanwhile, he sat down with their younger brother and began cooking a simple meal with his own hands. As he prepared the food, he spoke to the boy about everything that had happened and explained more about the nature of this new world. At the same time, Aisha sat privately with Miharu and shared deeper insights, telling her that she was, in fact, a spirit bonded to Rio, her existence entirely tied to him. Later, as everyone gathered around the table, Rio began explaining what had truly happened. He said that everything they experienced was the result of summoning magic. He clarified that this type of magic was incredibly rare and could only be performed by a few individuals. The person who casts it must use nearly all of their magical energy to transfer people from one world to another. This means whoever summoned them must possess unnatural power and a magical level beyond human limits, unless they weren't human to begin with. Miharu looked up at him, her face filled with concern, and asked if there was a way to return to their world. Rio replied honestly that he couldn't give her a definite answer yet, but promised to do everything in his power to find a way back for them. Then he revealed part of his own secret. He too had come from Japan, but unlike them, he hadn't arrived in his own body. Instead, he had awakened in the body of a newborn child in this world, and since then, he'd lived a new life from the beginning. That's why, he explained, their chances of returning were far greater than his. At that point, Celia joined the conversation. She said that before coming to this world, she had heard of an ancient legend she once dismissed as a myth, but now realized might be true. She began recounting 1,000 years ago. The kings were in a long war against the demons to protect mankind. These wars lasted for many years, until the kings finally chose 6 heroes and granted them the authority to rule the world on their behalf. Rio then commented that this legend might be directly related to the events happening now. However, Miharu shared that before arriving in this world, she had been with others, but wasn't sure whether they had also been brought here. She asked Rio what he thought. He answered that it was certainly possible, but still just a possibility. Nothing was certain yet. That night, Aishia asked Rio if she could sleep beside him. She explained that her magical power was fundamentally drawn from his energy, and that her very existence was directly tied to him. Therefore, it would be best for her to stay close to him, especially while sleeping. But Rio firmly refused, saying it wouldn't be appropriate. Seeing how serious he was, Aishia chose to stay silent. In the end, she decided to sleep next to Miharu instead, saying her magic was extremely weak and that staying near her might help. And so, everyone went to rest in their places for the night. The next morning, Rio awoke, lost in a storm of thoughts, speaking to himself. I never imagined I'd meet Miharu again in this world. How would she react if she found out that I'm the same person? Rio, the boy she once knew. All the memories we shared might come rushing back. But the truth is, I now live under a different identity. I am Rio here, but I was once Haruto, and Haruto died in the real world. That's why I must continue on this path until I find the one who murdered my family and take my revenge. While deep in thought, Celia entered and said, I haven't had a chance to talk to you since I returned, but today, I have some questions. You carry so many secrets. How did you meet Aishia? How can you speak these people's language? And it seems like you've known Miharu and her siblings for a long time. Rio answered her truthfully. I'll tell you everything. The truth is, I'm not from this world. I came here after I died in my original world. When you first saw me, I still had all my memories from the life I once lived. My name back then was Haruto, and I was 20 years old when it happened. Celia was stunned. So that's why, she said. That's why I felt there was something different about you from the very beginning. You always seemed more mature than your current age, like someone who had lived a much longer life. That's what made you feel unlike anyone else, Rio continued. By coincidence, Miharu and her siblings who were transported here, they're also from my world. And Miharu especially. She's not just anyone. She was my childhood love, the girl I once promised to return for and take with me when I grew up. Upon hearing that, Celia finally opened up about what had truly been troubling her. She admitted she'd been constantly worried about her father, and didn't even know if he was safe. Rio tried to comfort her, and suggested she write to him to check on him, but using an alias so that she wouldn't be discovered, and still get her message to him. That night, we see Charles sitting with Rice, both discussing the strange events unfolding around them. Rice said, I never expected your fiancé to be kidnapped so suddenly. But Charles, trying to appear composed, replied, there's no need to worry. We managed to eliminate the bandits. The problem now is, we have no information on Celia's whereabouts. Even worse, all our searches have come up empty, so we'll have to close the kingdom's borders until we find a new lead. Doubt began to creep into Rice's voice. Maybe it's Rio and that spirit of his, Aishia. Maybe they're the ones hiding her. Charles replied seriously, it's becoming clear now. The legendary prophecy is being fulfilled. The one that foretells a hero descending into our kingdom. I'll personally have my father put them under surveillance until I'm sure. Rice looked at him, tense. I truly hope they're loyal to your kingdom, Beltram. I have a feeling you'll soon possess another sacred stone, and that could completely shift the balance of power in your favor. Charles confirmed, you're right. The stone is now with Princess Flora and the Duke. I'm sure they're currently welcoming the hero they summoned. Elsewhere, we find a mysterious young man being treated like a legendary hero in the royal palace, despite not understanding anything that's going on. What was strange was that he actually enjoyed it, as if living out a fantasy. One of the people beside him said, "You may ask for anything you wish, and it shall be granted, no questions asked." The young man felt like he was inside a bizarre novel. He remembered the last thing that happened in his old world, how he was just lying in bed, living an ordinary life, when suddenly a massive magical circle appeared beneath him and transported him here. When he woke up, he was surrounded by soldiers, and standing before him were Princess Flora and her loyal guardian Gustav. Startled, he shouted, "Who are you people? What's happening right now?" Flora stepped forward and introduced herself. "I am the second princess of this kingdom. This is Gustav, my faithful protector." It was then that the young man realized he truly had been pulled into a different world altogether. Flora looked at him and said, "It's clear you're the chosen hero, foretold by the great prophecy of the 6 kings." It was the same prophecy Rio had mentioned earlier. She began telling him the story, though he didn't understand much of it. Then Flora added, "The greatest proof that you're the hero is the sword you're holding." The boy looked down in surprise. There was indeed a sword in his hand, one he hadn't even noticed before. Seeing the opportunity, he decided to play along and introduced himself as Sakana. And from there, negotiations began between him and the kingdom, and deep down, he was determined to walk away victorious. While speaking with them, Sakana realized that the reason he was brought here had something to do with the stone Princess Flora possessed. He asked them directly if they had a way to send him back to his original world, insisting that what happened to him was nothing short of kidnapping. Flora answered honestly, saying she didn't know if that was possible. Gustav then stepped in to calm the tension, assuring him that he was misunderstanding the situation and that Gustav himself would explain everything. Meanwhile, Rio was flying through the skies with Miharu, carrying her in his arms. She was both awestruck and overwhelmed. This was her first time ever experiencing flight. It felt surreal to her, like she was dreaming rather than awake. On the other side, Celia sat with Aisha, asking questions about Rio, trying to understand him better. She said he always seemed mysterious and hard to grasp. But Aisha responded, "I know everything about him. We share memories and awareness. We possess one soul. That makes me the closest person to him. His trust in people, it returned because of you. You were the first to reach out your hand to help him." At that moment, Rio and Miharu arrived near the kingdom. Before landing, he changed his hair color to conceal his identity so no one would recognize him. Then he pulled out a magical necklace and handed it to the others, explaining that they could use it to change their hair color too, so they could walk around safely without drawing attention. They descended into the market and began exploring, buying clothes and other goods. Miharu was filled with joy, barely able to believe what she was experiencing. Upon returning home, Rio sat down with them and told Miharu that he had searched extensively for their missing friends, but had found no trace of them. He explained that the most likely scenario was that they, too, had been summoned into this world as part of the 6 heroes mentioned in the prophecy. Miharu was shaken by the news, overcome with anxiety. She no longer knew whether her friends were safe, or if their fate had already taken a dark turn. The next morning, Rio decided to leave. He bid everyone farewell and entrusted Aisha with taking good care of everyone at the house. Then, using his unique techniques, he teleported and vanished in the blink of an eye, arriving at the spirit village. The moment his feet touched the ground, Latina appeared, having sensed his energy from afar. Her eyes lit up with joy at seeing him again. Soon the rest of the girls followed, all of them rushing toward him, overwhelmed with happiness for being able to see him once more. Rio told them he had come for an urgent matter and needed to consult the village elders about something of great importance. He asked the girls to help him arrange a meeting. They guided him to the Council of Elders, where Rio sat before them and began recounting everything that had happened. He said, "The 6 pillars suddenly lit up, and at that exact moment, 3 people from another world appeared. I believe they're connected to the ancient legend, the one about the 6 heroes foretold to come and save this world." One of the elders asked in surprise, "And why do you believe they are from another world?" Rio replied confidently, "Because they're currently living at my house. I've been protecting them, and they still know nothing about this world. I'm also convinced that 2 others were accidentally pulled in during the summoning process, and were lost somewhere along the way." Another elder stood up, astonished. "You actually managed to communicate with them?" Rio nodded. "And how did you understand their language?" Rio answered coolly, "In my previous life, I lived in their world, so talking with them was natural for me." He then added, "Still, I won't reveal everything now. I'll leave the details for a more suitable time. What I need from you is a promise. Allow the 3 siblings and one more person to stay in the village temporarily until I can find a way to return them to their world." The elder asked, "We understand the part about the 3 siblings, but who is the 4th person?" Rio replied, "She's my teacher. I saved her from a political marriage that would have destroyed her. On her wedding day, I rescued her from that fate." The girls present looked at him in admiration, touched by what they heard. The elder nodded and said, "I agree to welcome them into the village, but under one condition. If they ever return to their world, they must never reveal the secrets of the spirit village." Rio accepted without hesitation, and it was agreed that he would personally bring them to the village. That night, Rio stood with Latina and said, "I'm sorry for talking about my past life in front of everyone, but I had to do it to explain things to the elders." She asked him, "Do you think I should tell them the truth too, that I'm also from another world?" He replied, "You're not obligated to say anything. If you want to keep it a secret, then keep it to yourself." She asked again, "Those people who appeared, they're from your world, aren't they?" He answered, "Yes, they're from my world." She followed up, "Did you tell them that?" Rio nodded. "Yes. If I hadn't, they would have asked how I understood their language. I had no choice but to tell them. But even if more people from our world appear, you'll still be special to me, Latina." Then he explained, "One of them is a girl who was my childhood love. The others are her siblings. Still, I've kept it a secret that I'm the same boy she once loved, for 2 reasons. First, they're still adjusting to this world. Second, I'm no longer the same person I used to be in the other world." He asked Latina to keep this conversation between them. The next day, Rio said goodbye to Latina and the rest of the girls, telling them he would travel to retrieve the 3 siblings. He would be gone for about 2 weeks, and so he departed. We then shift to a completely different kingdom, where the king was seated in a grand hall with a princess. He told her that he summoned her urgently for a serious matter. He explained, "We used a powerful magical stone to summon a girl from another world, and it turns out she's a hero. I've heard that your kingdom also managed to summon someone from another world. Since this has now become a reality, I want you to inform your kingdom that they are invited to the ceremony we're hosting, and don't forget to remind them of the hero they summoned." The princess agreed to deliver the message, but she asked, "What is the name of the hero you summoned?" The king replied, "She said her name was Suki, but later explained that Suki is her family name, because in her world, family comes before the individual." The princess found the name strangely familiar, as if she'd heard it before, and it stirred a suspicion in her heart that Suki might be from the same world as their own hero. The king granted her permission to meet Suki in person, and so the king's daughter escorted her to where she was staying. Elsewhere, we see Rice standing in the heart of a dark forest, surrounded by terrifying monsters whose eyes glowed in the shadows. He issued a cold command, "I want you to capture anyone with immense magical power." You have until tomorrow. The monsters shot off like a raging storm, rushing toward their target. Meanwhile, Rice's trap to ensnare Rio was slowly unfolding. The next day at Celia's home, she was sitting and playing with the younger brother, while Miharu sat with her sister. Their conversation inevitably turned to Rio since the moment they met him. Her sister noticed and asked with clear jealousy, "Why are you talking about him all the time?" Jealousy was written all over her face. Miharu replied calmly, trying to reassure her, "I trust Rio. I'll leave everything to him. He'll find a way." Her sister gave a sarcastic half laugh and said, "This is the first time I've seen you flustered in front of a guy. You seem happy being around him." But Miharu quickly denied it. "Maybe it's just because he's kind and gentle with us. Nothing more." Her sister snapped back, "His rudeness reminds me of the old Haruto." Realizing her words were harsh, she apologized and left, only to fall deep into thought. Did she still love Haruto? Or was her heart beginning to lean towards someone else? At that moment, Rice's monsters appeared around the house. The air changed. A heavy, eerie presence blanketed the area. Miharu and her sister froze in fear and rushed to get inside. But the monsters broke through the magical barrier and stormed in with terrifying force. Just as it seemed everything would end, Aishia appeared, unleashing a powerful spell that drove the monsters back. She said, "They were drawn by the barrier's energy, but don't worry, I'll protect you even if it costs me my life." Before she could finish her words, a massive beast lunged at Miharu and her sister. At the last moment, Celia intervened and saved them both. Suddenly, a whirlwind of power burst through the air. Rio had arrived, throwing himself into the battle with everything he had. The monsters fought back with abnormal strength, They weren't ordinary creatures. Aishia told him, "These monsters don't emit the usual aura. Their dark color exposes what they truly are, something entirely different." Rio managed to take one down, only to find its body vanish and leave behind a strange crystal. He realized this was no illusion. These were real beasts. At the same time, Aishia used her magic to eliminate the rest. After the battle, Rio gathered everyone and said, "We have to move immediately. The danger is far from over." On the other side, Rice was observing as his monsters returned to him, but he noticed some of them never came back, specifically the ones Rio had defeated. The others returned, bringing captured warriors caught in the trap. Rice then ordered them to spread out again and continue the operation until his goal was achieved. The next morning, Rio transported his group to the village. Everyone was left stunned by the strange sensation of instantaneous travel. They couldn't believe they had left their previous location and arrived somewhere new in the blink of an eye. As soon as their feet touched the ground of the village and they saw the demi-humans, their gazes froze for a moment. Their forms were unfamiliar and different from anything they had known before. Rio smiled calmly and explained that these were not merely demi-humans, but unique spirits who lived hidden from the world, and only a very few people even knew of their existence. Suddenly, Latina spoke fluent Japanese, and everyone's eyes widened in shock. She laughed and said that, like Rio, she retained memories from her previous life. She then offered to teach them the language of this new world. Rio looked at her and asked if she was sure about revealing her true identity to everyone. She replied confidently that she had already told the village elder and her friends long ago, and they had accepted her as she was. The moment she heard Miharu's name, she immediately recognized her and welcomed her warmly. They then began a calm tour around the village. They noticed that the villagers were eyeing them with cautious, mixed expressions. Curiosity laced with fear. Rio explained that the village had been isolated from the human world for a long time, and its people were naturally reserved when dealing with outsiders. Soon after, the village chief and the other elders arrived, warmly welcoming the guests. They held a small celebration adorned with lights and incense, where Dryas greeted them kindly, and the joy spread throughout the place. Miharu's younger sister watched the scene with sparkling eyes. She noticed how the villagers interacted with Rio, with love, respect, and trust, and she felt that this young man truly was someone worth relying on. The next day, Rio and Celia said their farewells to everyone. Miharu had prepared a generous meal for them, and, while looking at Rio with grateful eyes, said, "Thank you for everything you're doing for us. I promise I'll repay you one day." He simply smiled in return, then departed with Celia and Aishia, heading towards Celia's family estate. Meanwhile, in another part of the kingdom, the summoned hero from another world was standing before the princess. She told him that a special ceremony would be held to welcome the newly summoned heroine, and that he was personally invited. She also mentioned that Princess Flora and the Duke would be attending. Although the Duke had the final say in such matters, the hero was already distracted. Captivated by the princess's charm, he immediately accepted the invitation and asked if she herself would be attending. When she said yes, he smiled and confirmed he would definitely be there. That night, Rio and Celia arrived at her family home. She was overwhelmed with emotion upon returning. She told Rio that there was a secret passage in the garden, one that only family members knew about, and suggested they use it to leave the letter. But Rio preferred to use spiritual arts to hide their presence, and indeed, they succeeded in entering unnoticed by the guards. At that very moment, Celia's father was sitting in his study. When she lit the lantern, the crystal beside him glowed, signaling that his daughter had arrived. He rushed to the passageway, but found only a handwritten letter. "I am now living a peaceful life among people I trust. I know I let you down when I refused to marry the Duke, but I promise I'll return one day and tell you everything." He read the letter and sighed in relief, realizing she had just left moments ago. Meanwhile, Rio and Celia had already taken off, soaring through the sky. He turned to her and asked if she was sure she didn't want to see her family. She replied firmly that this was the best decision for now, to avoid complications. Then, with deep sincerity, she thanked him for everything he had done for her. The next morning, Yuzoma was sailing aboard her ship when she suddenly spotted an enormous dragon flying overhead. Its size was terrifying. One strike from it could have wiped them off the face of the earth. Fortunately, luck was on their side. The dragon didn't notice the ship and continued on its way as if nothing were there. At that moment, Uzoma and her crew realized that continuing the journey would be a huge risk. They were forced to make an emergency landing in one of the nearby cities. There, Uzoma was surprised to find Duke Gino's ship docked at the very same place. It turned out they had also stopped because of the dragon. An urgent meeting was held where they exchanged information about what they had seen and tried to assess the nature and path of this mysterious creature. In the same city, Rio and Celia were together, but they had lost track of Aishia. They searched for her until they found her calmly eating in a food stall, completely unbothered. As Rio entered, the vendor looked at him and asked, "Are you that girl's servant?" Rio hesitated for a second, then replied, "Yes, I'm her servant. I'll pay for what she ate." But the man reassured him, "No need to pay today. The whole city is exempt right now because summoned heroes from another world are here, and they've been invited to a grand ceremony in a city called Galark." At that, Rio asked nervously, "Do you know their names?" The vendor replied that he didn't, but he heard their ship was headed to Galark for the ceremony. During the meeting, Sama said that the presence of such a powerful dragon nearby was terrifying and dangerous, far beyond what humans could handle. Uzoma replied that, in the worst-case scenario, if the dragon threatened the city, they would propose evacuation. Sama then asked her what she planned to do now. She said she was returning to her homeland. She had left her assistant in charge, but in truth she was the actual ruler, and her country needed her. Sama looked concerned and said that returning now was risky, but Uzoma reassured him that her maids were used to battle and danger. Sama responded firmly, "I'm a hero. How can I stand by and watch? I'm coming with you." One of them tried to object, but Gustav interrupted saying, "He's a hero. Our status does not allow us to stop or command him." Uzoma then clarified that Sama was a hero from a different kingdom and should not risk his life for theirs, but his persistence made her agree in the end. As they were preparing to depart, one of the guards sent by the Duke to protect her arrived. He introduced himself as Brant, and turned out to be someone who knew the maid Arya from long ago. He told her that he had searched for her for a long time, and that what happened to her family had been cruel. Arya replied calmly, "Princess Uzoma adopted me. I now serve her." The convoy set off. On the road, Arya suddenly shouted for the guards to stop the carriages. A large number of monsters had appeared ahead and on both sides, far more than usual, as if someone had arranged it. Massive boulders came crashing down onto the convoy. Arya released her magical power and formed a barrier to protect the princess and those around her, but the monsters kept increasing, nearly 400 of them. Arya bravely stood at the front and ordered the soldiers to stay behind and protect the princess no matter what. She stepped forward alone and unleashed a stunning attack that shocked everyone. In the distance, Rice was watching the scene. He was the mastermind behind it all. He muttered to himself, "I didn't expect them to hold out this long. That assistant is stronger than I thought." Back in the carriage, Sama was panicking, trying to hide his fear. He pretended to be calm and said, "Why haven't the guards taken care of the monsters yet? If this continues, I'll step in." Suddenly, a massive object crashed onto the carriage, shaking it violently. Sama drew his sword and shouted, "I can't take this anymore. I'm fighting." He jumped out of the carriage, followed by the two princesses. Uzoma cast a barrier spell to protect Flora. Still, Sama hesitated to unleash his power. He knew that activating it would draw the monsters toward him, and the truth was, he didn't have the real skill to face such overwhelming numbers. So he asked the third princess to tend to Flora and help a wounded soldier. She used a healing technique that revived their morale. Her assistant soon returned and reported that she had eliminated many of the monsters. The princess smiled confidently and said, "I'm counting on you. Finish the rest." Her assistant charged forward, fighting with such power that Brant stood in awe of her strength. But the true shock came when a minotaur appeared. The massive beast approached Sama with heavy steps. Sama collapsed to the ground, frozen in terror. The beast charged toward the maid, who barely dodged the first strike. Still, that light blow flung the carriage away, nearly killing Flora, until Uzoma saved her at the last second. Just as the beast was about to swing its massive sword again, a sharp flash cut through the air. It was Rio descending from the sky. He raised his sword and sliced through the Minotaur's body, erasing it in seconds. Everyone stood in utter shock. Flora saw his face and immediately recognized him as the one who had saved them before. Back at the academy, moments later, another Minotaur appeared, larger and stronger. Without hesitation, Rio charged at it, clashing with its massive blade and throwing it deep into the forest. Then a third monster emerged. Rio met it head-on with swift and decisive strikes that left everyone speechless. As he got closer to Flora, he recognized her too. Rio looked around in disbelief. He couldn't comprehend how he had encountered the princess in a place like this. He muttered to himself, "I never imagined I'd see her here." Suddenly, Princess Uzoma addressed him, thanking him and introducing herself as the ruler of Amandi. In return, Rio introduced himself as Haruto. At that moment, Flora's eyes widened in surprise, as if she suspected he was the same Rio she had known before, but she wasn't entirely sure. Rio noticed her expression and asked calmly, "Did I do something to trouble you, princess?" She replied, somewhat flustered, "No, not at all. I just feel like I've seen you somewhere before." Rio answered with a slight smile, "I don't think that's possible." Just then, Flora's attendant spoke up. "If the princess feels like she's seen you before, perhaps you're a noble and not just an ordinary man." But Rio quickly denied it. "No, I'm just a wanderer. I travel from place to place, training with the sword. I have no ties to royalty." Suddenly, a maid approached. The moment she laid eyes on Rio, she recognized him instantly. Calling out his name, she said, "Haruto, I was the one who helped you at Rika's shop that day. I'm Chloe." This came as a surprise to the princess, who hadn't expected Chloe to know him. Chloe quickly explained, "I was in charge of the main branch in Amandi, and I met him there." The princess looked at her in shock, then turned to Rio and said, "I had no idea you were one of our customers. Thank you again." At that moment, Sama appeared and introduced himself as the newly summoned hero. As soon as Rio heard his name, he immediately deduced that he too had come from Japan. He smiled and said, "So you're the one everyone's been talking about. Rumors of you are everywhere." Sama replied confidently, "That's right." Rio responded with respect, "It's an honor to meet you." Sama smiled, "You seem like a skilled swordsman. Your battle was incredible." Rio replied humbly, "Truthfully, you all far surpass me. Just being among you makes me nervous." Princess Flora looked at him in disbelief and said, "How can someone who slayed a minotaur without even blinking say that?" Suddenly, Sama began to show signs of jealousy. He urged them to keep moving, and the group continued on their way. Meanwhile, Rio couldn't help but notice how strangely Flora was behaving around him, as though she truly did recognize him. It puzzled him even more, especially seeing how quickly Sama had integrated with everyone. Rio then offered to repair the carriage that had been damaged by the monster. The princess turned to her maid, Arya, and said they should inspect it first. But Rio stopped suddenly upon hearing the name Arya. It felt oddly familiar. A memory flashed in his mind. He was flying with Celia and Aisha, and he had said to them, "Once we cross this forest, we'll reach Amandi." At that very moment, Aisha had sensed a battle taking place between Arya and a group of monsters. They all rushed toward the fight. There, Celia recognized Arya and said to Rio, "She used to be with me at the academy. I heard she now serves the daughter of Duke Kritya." A massive monster appeared. Rio handed Celia over to Aisha and said, "Take care of her." Then he moved toward the beast. Before engaging, Rio repaired the broken carriage using only his sword. The princess stared in awe and asked, "I saw you command the wind. Is that sword enchanted as well?" He replied briefly, "Yes, but it runs on spiritual energy, not conventional magic." A short time later, Rio had finished fixing the carriage. Everyone stood stunned by his skill and speed. But before they could leave, their eyes were drawn to the massive sword of the monster, still embedded in the earth. Rio channeled his spiritual energy and effortlessly pulled it from the ground. Their eyes widened in shock. Everyone stared at him in amazement. Even the princess couldn't believe the strength he possessed. At that moment, Rio thought to himself, "This man possesses terrifying magical energy." He boarded the carriage with them. The princess turned to him and said, "When we reach Amandi, I will thank you properly." He replied, "It would be my honor." Meanwhile, back in the spirit village, Miharu and her sisters were learning the language of this world and training to use spiritual energy through magic. Doris herself was overseeing their training. As Miharu's younger sister walked alone, she saw a group of children playing and was reminded of the happy days she once shared with Miharu and Rio. The laughter, the joy, the moments when Rio had promised he would always stay with them and never leave. But in the end, he had left and broken that promise. Since that day, she had viewed him as nothing more than a liar. Latina approached and brought her home. They sat together, and after Latina finished telling her own story, Miharu's sister remained silent. deep in thought. Then she spoke softly. There was someone I loved in the past, but he betrayed me and caused me so much pain that I started seeing the world differently. Later, my mother remarried and had a son, my younger brother, and I also gained an older brother, my stepfather's son. Since then, my life changed. He was always by my side, helping me, caring for me, with a kindness I could never forget. That's what made me cling to him. That's what made me feel like I wasn't alone in this world. Meanwhile, in the great empire of Prokashia, Emperor Nedal sat in his grand palace. One of his loyal subordinates appeared before him and said, "It seems, my lord, that you're planning to launch a new war." The emperor smiled arrogantly and replied, "Yes, I want to ignite war by any means necessary. I seek to expand my power and take control over the rest of the kingdoms. I've already sent an envoy to the neighboring kingdom. This will be the first step in the plan." Then came the twist. A familiar figure entered the room. It was Rice, the envoy sent to the kingdom. Through his manner and words, it became clear that he and the emperor had shared plans and had been in secret alliance for some time. A quiet yet cunning pact had been taking shape behind the scenes, filling the atmosphere with tension and silent calculation. Rice turned to the emperor's aide and said frankly, "I have a request. I need your support. I want to succeed in kidnapping one of the princesses, Flora to be exact. Having her in our grasp will accelerate the execution of our plan, but the mission is extremely dangerous, and I cannot do it alone. That's why I need your full support. Without it, there's no guarantee we'll succeed." The next day, Rio entered the city accompanied by his assistant, whom he dropped off before heading straight toward a restaurant in the city center. There, he found Celia and Aishia sitting together. He greeted them and informed them that he had decided to stay in the city for a few days. He told them about his encounter with Flora, and Celia asked, "Did she recognize your identity?" He replied, "It seemed like she sensed something, but she didn't show it outright." He then asked her to teach him proper etiquette, as he would soon be meeting with the princesses. That evening, Flora's attendant was sitting with her, speaking about her maid, Arya, and expressing great admiration for her skills. The princess thanked him, then asked a strange question. Shouldn't the hero be the one with the power to change this situation? The attendant nodded, saying she was right, but explained that the current hero still lacked the experience needed to fully master his powers. The princess replied that she didn't quite understand the nature of his strength. He couldn't fight the monster, yet he lifted the massive sword with ease. She wondered aloud whether the source of power was the sword itself. The attendant agreed it was a strong possibility, especially since the sacred magical affinity only appears to heroes. He added that displaying such strength raised deeper questions. The princess then asked, "So you think he just needs more experience and nothing more?" The attendant confirmed it. "He lacks experience for now, but I've been putting him through illusion-based battles against knights to help him improve." The princess remarked that his first real battle hadn't gone well at all. The attendant responded, "Let's treat it as a learning opportunity, nothing more." He added, "Despite everything, we can't deny that he was the one who saved us all. He defeated 3 minotaurs at once and demonstrated incredible control over the enchanted sword in his possession." At that moment, the princess began to suspect his identity. "He may be from a noble family," she said, "but hiding his true origins from everyone." The attendant urged her to learn more about him and suggested he attend the upcoming meeting. She agreed, and he also requested that she send knights to investigate the forest for any clues regarding the monster's appearance. The scene shifted to 2 of the queen's guards walking with 2 young women, clearly taking advantage of them for money. The girls had no idea the men were soldiers. They thought they were just regular nobles. As they walked, the guards grumbled about the hero's orders, their faces showing clear resentment. They hated him. They didn't see him as a real noble, and certainly not worthy of leading them. He was just a man from another world. They reached a hotel and demanded a specific room. The receptionist told them it was already occupied and offered other rooms, but they refused. They even offered to pay triple the price, but the employee declined firmly. They became aggressive, threatening him with their authority. Unbeknownst to them, the room they demanded was the one currently occupied by Rio, Celia, and Aishia. Rio heard the shouting outside, and suddenly the guards burst into the room. The frightened hotel staff rushed to apologize to Rio. Rio, calm and cold, turned to the guards and asked what they wanted and why all the commotion. Upon recognizing him, the guards said they were among the group he had once saved. As Rio learned their names, we discover they were Stuart and Alfor, his former classmates at the academy. They immediately began mocking him, as they used to. Rio replied flatly that he didn't remember them and didn't want to. When he asked why they were here, one One of them said they wanted to use his room. Despite this, Rio responded politely, "I was just having my meal. You're welcome to come in and eat if you'd like." He got up to leave with Celia and Aisha, but one of the soldiers stopped him and asked him to stay for dinner. Rio replied calmly, "I've had enough to eat." The soldier grew agitated. "So, you're rejecting our invitation?" He accused Rio of arrogance, calling him a commoner. "You may be skilled with a sword, but you're still just an ordinary man." At that moment, the hotel staff intervened, warning Rio that continued trouble with guests would force disciplinary action. Rio prepared to leave again, but the soldier blocked his path. "You don't know how to show proper respect to nobles," he sneered. Rio replied coolly, "Unfortunately, I was born an ordinary man." He added, "I don't like raising my hand against others for their actions, but I heard that regional laws allow duels under certain circumstances." That sentence was all it took to enrage the guard. "How dare you speak to me like that?" The soldier lunged, but Rio easily dodged the blow and controlled the situation. In a blur, he delivered a crushing strike that knocked both Stewart and Alford to the ground. Word quickly reached the princess's assistant. She was embarrassed by what had happened. This was not how she wanted Rio to see the nobility. Determined to fix the situation, she decided to apologize to Rio in person. At the same time, Florizade resolved to teach the soldiers a lesson they'd never forget. He confronted them in fury. "I never expected anything good from you two, but this?" He scolded them harshly. "Your foolishness has become my burden." He announced that they would receive no second chance. "The punishment will be the stripping of your titles. You'll no longer be nobles," the soldiers protested. "It was just a fight with some swordsmen," but their father shouted furiously, "That swordsman possesses a talent that far exceeds yours. He defeated 3 monsters at once with terrifying power and perfect mastery over his sword. Do you think you could do that?" He then declared, "I will give you one last chance to restore your reputation. You'll participate in the investigation of the forest. Princess Flora herself will oversee it. If you prove yourselves, I may reconsider my support, but if you fail, you'll be sent back to Rodania and imprisoned for life." In the end, they agreed, but he made one condition clear: they must apologize to Rio first. Though they felt humiliated, they had no choice. Meanwhile, the princess was with Rio. She informed him of their apology and said she would grant any request he asked of them. Rio replied quietly, "I accept their apology, and I don't need anything from anyone." Later, he went to the palace where the 2 soldiers arrived and bowed before him. Without hesitation, Rio accepted their apology. After that, he joined the hero and the rest of the group again. The princess asked him about the beginning of his journey. He told her he had started at the age of 11, after the death of his parents, and was now 16. At that point, the Duke's assistant offered him a position in the palace that would allow him to quickly rise to nobility, along with a generous salary, because his strength was more than deserving. But Rio firmly refused. He said he preferred to live freely, on his own terms, without constraints. At the same time, the soldiers who had clashed with Rio went into the forest as the princess had requested. They searched for any clue that might explain what had happened. One of them was furious. "Why am I forced to do this? Why do I have to walk with useless soldiers for the sake of someone like Rio who doesn't even deserve it?" As they continued walking, their captain warned them of possible monster attacks. Then suddenly, the emperor's assistant appeared before them. After that, the scene shifts to Miharu, who was standing in the village square, drenched in sweat from intense training. She gripped her sword tightly, focusing on each and every strike. The village boys and girls stood nearby, watching in awe. They couldn't understand how she possessed such unwavering determination, or why she pushed herself so harshly. One of them asked, "Why are you doing this? Why do you train day and night?" Breathing heavily, Miharu replied, "I do it so I won't be a burden on Rio. He always fights and risks his life to protect us. But this time, I want to protect myself, and protect him too. I don't want to remain weak, always waiting for him to save me." At that moment, the scene shifts again, to the emperor's assistant, standing with coldness in his eyes. Beside him was Rice, staring in silence, uncertain why they had come to this place. Rice gave a sly smile and said, "We came here specifically for you. We knew you'd arrived." He slowly drew his sword, his eyes gleaming with menace, and ordered the emperor's assistant to eliminate them and end the story once and for all. The assistant, however, looked at them with disdain. "These are just children," he thought. "They don't stand a chance." Their leader stood firm, but the assistant lunged at them with terrifying speed, striking them down one after another. another. Soldiers fell before him like leaves in the wind, and in a matter of moments, only weak and broken bodies remained on the ground. Then Rice stepped forward calmly, taking note of the names of the fallen soldiers. From his expression, it was clear this was not just an ambush. Something far bigger was being prepared. A few conscious soldiers tried to flee, including a noble guard, but before they could take 2 steps, the assistant appeared right before them, grabbing them with overwhelming force, leaving no room for escape. At the same time, Rio was bidding farewell to Flora after meeting her, but she invited him to a tea party. He accepted. His presence seemed to have left a strange impact on Flora, enough for the hero, Sama, to notice. He said to her, "Ever since Rio appeared, your eyes haven't left him. You've changed." She tried to justify herself, saying she was merely trying to understand his talent for the good of the kingdom. Then we return to Rice, who suddenly wakes up to a horrifying nightmare. He realizes that the soldiers who were once with him had now turned into monsters. He watches in terror as one of his comrades transforms into a beast right before his eyes. One of them says, "We've turned all your soldier friends, and you'll be next. But this time, you won't be like those ghosts. You'll be something different." They implant a strange jewel into his body, causing him unbearable pain as he begins to transform into a hideous, terrifying creature. Meanwhile, the Duke notices that the group of soldiers he had sent hasn't returned, and there's been no news from them. Worry begins to creep into his heart. He decides to wait one more day, and if they don't come back, he'll search for them himself. "I was right," he mutters. "We need someone more talented to help us." At the same time, Flora was lost in thought, trying to piece together her feelings about Rio. She was confused by how strangely she'd been acting toward him. Then the Duke arrived and informed her of what had happened. He apologized, saying, "My soldiers were lost because of this mission," but the princess admitted her mistake. "I should have sent my own guards, not yours. They may already be dead." She suggested sending a stronger group this time. The Duke proposed we should have Rio accompany them. He might be the key to victory, and to eliminating the monsters for good. The princess agreed to the idea. Back with Rice, he was now standing among monsters. His assistant informed him that the noble soldier's transformation was complete, and they would begin their movement by dawn. This new creature was far more powerful than the rest, highly skilled in combat, and would be a deadly weapon in the upcoming battle. Elsewhere, Aisha woke Rio and informed him of a terrible threat. Monsters had started to appear and had sensed their presence, but hadn't yet pinpointed their location. Meanwhile, the monsters were drawing closer, and the soldiers quickly blew the alarm horns to keep people inside their homes. Celia woke to the sound of the loud sirens and ran toward Rio, her heart filled with worry. She asked what was happening, and Rio calmly responded, "Our priority is to gather information about the attacking monsters." Celia insisted on fighting. She told him she could use magic well. He agreed and went to assess the situation himself. There, he discovered that the monsters had breached the city's gates and broken through the surrounding defenses. Despite everything, Rio still believed there was hope, but suddenly, Aisha returned and warned him. Another group of monsters was entering the city from a different direction. This meant the city was now surrounded. The citizens began fleeing east, but that created a new problem. The monsters had already infiltrated from that very side. At that moment, the soldiers prepared to launch a full-force attack. But the monsters' strength was overwhelming. They destroyed the palace's main gates and burst inside. Even the maids began defending themselves. It was chaos until Rio intervened. He charged a monster head-on, taking it down. Then another group. He defeated them as well. Everyone watched in awe. At the same time, the princess was directing the remaining soldiers, trying to hold the lines. One of the female guards informed her, "Thanks to Rio, we've regained control over much of the battle." Relieved, the princess felt a bit more at ease. But far away from all this, Rice and the Emperor's assistant were hiding in a distant location, watching everything unfold with twisted joy. They had succeeded in unleashing the monsters deep into the kingdom. Meanwhile, Rio continued fighting with unmatched skill. Even the soldiers couldn't take their eyes off him. His power stunned everyone. But in the middle of the battle, he noticed something strange. A group of monsters was standing still, not participating in the fight. He quickly realized they weren't real monsters. They were kingdom soldiers, transformed by Rice's dark abilities. As he focused on their faces, he said to himself, "I remember fighting these men before. Back then, I could take them down in seconds. If one of them manages to sneak into the city now, they could cause chaos. Their goal isn't just to fight, it's something else entirely." But instead of wasting time on them, Rio decided to move to another area to keep fighting and stop the monsters from advancing further. At that moment, the soldier monsters began releasing strange and terrifying screams. The guards stood frozen, unable to understand what was happening. Suddenly, Rice turned to the noble soldier and said, "It's your turn now. Go and attack them yourself. We're counting on you entirely." Suddenly, the monsters surged forward like a raging storm and tore through the soldiers mercilessly. The catastrophe worsened when a massive monster appeared, shaking the earth with each step it took. At that moment, Arya, Flora's maid, decided to stand in the monster's way and resist it with all the strength she had. Meanwhile, Rio noticed another monster rushing at a terrified little girl who couldn't move. He launched forward at full speed and sliced the beast in half before it reached her, only to find another monster behind him, which he also eliminated instantly. Soon after, a confused guard approached Rio and said, "You're Rio, right? I have an urgent message from the princess. You must go to her office immediately." At the same time, the noble soldier stood beside the emperor's assistant, who told him coldly, "Your mission begins now. Attack the princess and the hero, but do not harm the princess. Do you understand me?" Nearby, a guard overheard the conversation. The assistant noticed him and ordered the noble soldier to silence him. The soldier obeyed and killed him instantly. However, the guard's dying scream reached those in the princess's office, alerting them that something was wrong. Suddenly, the noble soldier stormed the office, accompanied by terrifying monsters that attacked without hesitation. The hero immediately reacted, and one of the queen's guards stepped forward to defend, but a massive beast blocked his way and overpowered him with ease. In the next instant, the noble soldier struck the hero with devastating force, knocking him unconscious in one blow. Everyone was in shock, not just because of the monster's power and appearance, but because he spoke. That had never happened before. Then, the creature rushed at Duke Irvi, his own father, and landed a deadly blow to his abdomen. The Duke's other son, engaged in battle with another monster, couldn't help him. The beast continued its assault, then grabbed the Duke and hurled him toward his frozen son. With all the enemy monsters occupied in battle, the princess saw a chance to escape. She ran swiftly, but as soon as she exited the office, she was shocked to find the emperor's assistant standing there waiting. He grabbed her and left the building. Meanwhile, Rio stood next to the other princess, who thanked him for saving her. But Aisha interrupted, saying there were still monsters inside the building. The princess couldn't believe it. She said the building was protected by elite soldiers, and no such reports had reached her. But Rio and Aisha insisted, so the princess took their advice and ordered the soldiers to search the entire place. At that moment, Rice spoke with the emperor's assistant, telling him to escape with the princess to avoid being caught in a pointless battle. It became clear that the real objective from the beginning had been to kidnap the princess. Elsewhere, Flora's assistant was fighting the monsters with all the magical techniques she knew, but she quickly realized her attacks had no effect. She was on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, the hero awoke, his eyes filled with fury, and lunged at the monsters with a strength no one expected. He eliminated them one after another, then launched a water elemental assault on the noble soldier, destroying everything around him. The disaster was that Rio and Flora were on the lower floor of the same building. When they saw the massive explosion, they realized it came from the very room where the hero and Flora had been. Yet to everyone's shock, the noble soldier survived the hero's attack. As he moved to pursue the monsters, Rice suddenly struck him from behind with a powerful blow that knocked him out. Then, Rice looked at the soldier and ordered him to head into battle with the remaining enemies. As he left, Rice drew a magical circle on the ground, summoning wave after wave of terrifying monsters that began attacking the citizens. A group of soldiers quickly surrounded them, and a fierce battle erupted in the streets. On the other side, Rio stood in the heart of the battlefield, swiftly decapitating monsters at incredible speed. But then his eyes fell on a scene that froze him in place. Flora had been captured. She was being held tightly by one of the enemies, screaming in pain and fear, calling out to the hero and the others for help. The enemy raised his weapon, threatening to cut off her leg if anyone moved. Rio focused on the enemy's face and voice. When he pieced the details together, he was shocked. It was the same man who had hunted Dima, the same man who had killed his mother. His heart burned with vengeance. But Aisha came to him and said, "You must go after the kidnapper. I'll handle the monsters." She used her magic to erect a massive barrier to stop the beasts from reaching the citizens. Rio accepted her words. Before leaving, he looked at Flora and made a vow in front of everyone. "I will save you, no matter what it takes." Then he rushed off after the enemy. Meanwhile, the others couldn't understand why the number of monsters was still increasing. Aisha continued her task, erecting barriers to protect the people. The princess was stunned by Aisha's immense magical power. It felt as if she came from another world, but Celia approached her and explained that Aisha possessed the same mysterious magical force as Rio. Indeed, Aisha began unleashing her terrifying power against the monsters. She struck them with relentless magic, but they soon surrounded her from all sides. At that moment, the noble soldier returned, headed straight for Rio's group. It was clear he intended to eliminate them, especially Aisha. As soon as they heard his voice, everyone was stunned. His words revealed something mysterious. But before they could make sense of it, one of the monsters broke through the magical barrier protecting the princess. She quickly constructed a stronger stone shield to protect everyone. Meanwhile, Aisha faced the noble soldier, who attacked with a flurry of powerful strikes. She dodged every blow with incredible finesse, and in the critical moment, she landed a single, decisive slash, severing his head and ending him in a pool of blood. At that time, Rio was flying through the sky using his magical powers, having successfully tracked the killer's trace. He arrived at the killer's location and found him standing there with Flora. The killer was utterly shocked. No one had ever managed to follow him so precisely before. Meanwhile, Miharu was experiencing a strange dream. She saw a man standing before her, holding his sword and radiating a terrifying rage. She also saw Rio's mother lying in a pool of blood, with a small child who resembled Rio standing beside her. Over her lifeless body stood the killer himself. Then Rio appeared in the dream, drew his sword, and sliced off the killer's head. Miharu woke up shaken, feeling that this was not just a random nightmare. It was deeply connected to what was actually happening. Back to Rio, standing before the Emperor's assistant, who was none other than his mother's killer. Rio asked him to identify himself before drawing his sword, as if ready to kill Flora. But Rio's cold, indifferent gaze made it clear. He didn't come to protect Flora. He came for one reason only: revenge. The killer understood this, uncovered his face, and asked if Rio had been searching for him all this time. Rio replied sharply, "Yes, you are my true target since the beginning of my journey." The killer attacked with all his strength, but Rio easily blocked the blows without flinching. Shocked by Rio's strength and speed, the killer drew a massive sword. But even then, Rio handled it just as effortlessly. It became clear that Rio didn't want Flora involved in the fight. His focus was solely on the man who destroyed his family. Elsewhere, Rio's group was still battling the monsters. But Celia noticed something strange. All the monsters seemed to target her specifically, as if someone had marked her out. Back with Rio, he asked the killer why he bore such hatred. The killer said he would tell him everything if he made sure the princess stayed out of the fight. Rio agreed, and the killer began his confession. 10 years ago, I was your father's friend, but I betrayed and killed him. When I tried to kill you, your mother intervened, so I killed her too. Dumped her body in the trash after forcing her to drink something that weakened her completely. When I was about to kill you, she begged me to spare you, and I did. I was sure that one day you'd come back to avenge them. And here you are. Though I must say, your hair color has changed. A wave of sorrow and bitterness struck Rio as he remembered his painful past. Yet he did not break down. He had endured too much to fall now. At that moment, Flora realized that Rio was the same boy from the academy, despite his appearance having changed. She was shocked, but deep down, joyful to finally understand the truth. Suddenly, Rio burst with fury and slashed off the killer's arm. The killer panicked and tried to flee, but Rio chased him at incredible speed and struck him again. Still, the killer escaped once more. Enraged, Rio cut down all the trees in the forest to gain visibility, eventually finding him again. He launched a blazing attack that overwhelmed the killer, who realized he was utterly outmatched. As the killer attempted to heal himself, Rio burned his arm and destroyed one of his eyes. He stabbed him with his sword but didn't kill him. Instead, he left the sword inside him, unleashing flames that scorched him from within. In one final act of desperation, the killer tried to strike at Flora, but Rio instantly protected her. That's when Rice appeared and took the killer away, saying to Rio, "We'll come back for you, once we're ready to face your power." As they vanished, Rio heard the killer call out Rice's name. Before disappearing, they left behind a massive dragon that unleashed a terrifying fire breath. Even Celia and Aisha from far away felt its power, but the killer knew Rio would survive. And indeed, Rio defeated the dragon with his full strength. After the battle, Flora ran to him and said, "I knew it. You're Rio. I was sure from the beginning." But Rio, cold and detached, replied, "Forget anyone named Rio. Act as if you've never met him." His words deeply wounded Flora, who turned away heartbroken. Meanwhile, the princess thanked Aisha and Celia for everything they had done. She said that without their help, she would never have made it this far. They began treating the injured. It turned out that Duke Urfi was seriously wounded, so Celia used her healing magic to save him. When the Duke learned that Flora had been kidnapped, he became deeply worried. No one knew what had happened to her. Flora's maid blamed herself for encouraging her to run away, and the others tried to comfort her. Later, Rio brought Flora back to her home and reassured her family. He told them the kidnapper had escaped, but also revealed something shocking, that he had known the man for a long time, and that the kidnapper was directly tied to his dark past. It was clear this was deeply painful for Rio. Meanwhile, after many failed attempts to heal the killer, Rice said, "We have no choice but to use the stone." He plunged it into the killer's body and warned him, "If you ever see that boy again, don't even think about fighting him. He's far stronger than you." Rio later met with Aisha and Celia and told them everything that had happened. He explained that the kidnapper was the same man who killed his parents. Celia looked at him with sympathy, placed her hand on his shoulder, and promised, "I'll always be by your side, no matter what happens." Rio then sat down with the Duke, who revealed another secret. The killer had once been a candidate to become the royal sword, but instead became the imperial sword. The reason he was never appointed in the kingdom was because of a disaster involving a noble family. Since that day, he held a deep hatred for the queen, and that's what led to Flora's kidnapping. The Duke added that someone else was helping the killer, but no one knew who. It was someone whose face was always covered. He hinted that it might be Rice. The Duke offered to give Rio anything he wanted as compensation: wealth, land, anything. But Rio simply replied, "I want nothing, except to attend the hero welcome ceremony." The Duke agreed, but Rio made another decision. He would leave the kingdom until the day of the ceremony, afraid that his true identity might be revealed. Rio returned to the spirit village where Latina welcomed him with joy, her smile never fading. The whole village was thrilled to see him again. They began sharing stories of their achievements during his absence. But Rio had bigger news. He had found the location of their missing friends. They had been summoned as heroes to fulfill a prophecy, and they would appear at the upcoming ceremony. That's when everyone would be reunited again. But the question remains, will Rio succeed in returning Miharu and the others to their world? And will he continue his pursuit of the man who murdered his mother to the very end? We'll find out in Season 3. So if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.